Depending on who you ask, you might find that David Crowley's $30 million deal, the $30 million deal that was talked about, was a real deal. It was a real deal. And it never ended. It only ended because David Crowley died. That's a huge point. That's a big point. It's a point that I think a lot of people don't really want us covering or want us talking about for whatever reason. But we're going to talk about it now. We're going to talk about this deal. And if you haven't seen Dan Hinnan's full interview with Mike Baggio of the Michael Entertainment Group, the guys who are working on a $30 million deal, not giving David Crowley $30 million, but looking at looking at a way to make Gray State, and they figured the cost would be about $30 million, $25 to $30 million. So if you haven't seen or listened to the interview with Dan Hinnan and Mike Baggio III, the president of MEG, please do so. It is worth getting that side, because it's a side that we haven't heard. Other people have alluded to it and have mentioned it. Jordan Page mentioned it, but now we have it straight from one of the guys themselves, someone who was involved with the actual deal. So Mike Baggio called it a promising project. At first they were going to take it to the big screen, and then later they decided they were going to make it a series. So by September 2014, Gray State had moved from being pushed as a feature-length film to a TV series. It's a big difference from what David's dad says in the police reports, I believe page 64, where in November, Dan Sr. talked to David Crowley over the phone and asked about the deal. And according to Dan Crowley Sr., David Crowley said that he walked away from it. So once again, somebody is lying, or somebody is not telling the absolute truth. And another thing about Dan Crowley Sr. is he told police one thing, that he was not at the Crowley house with Christopher Klein and whoever was with Klein. And Klein said that he was at the house with Dan Crowley Sr. and Dan Crowley Jr. A couple days after the bodies were found. On January 17th, the bodies were found. January 19th, Chris Klein is in the house with some other people. And he obviously should not have, nobody should have been in the house at that point. But they were. But here you have differing stories, and we're going to get this a lot. And you can pile up all of the differing stories from people who all believe that David Crowley is guilty. Now, of all the people, I do find Mike Baggio to be one of the more credible people, because he's not involved. He has nothing to really lose from it. He was not going to move forward with Gray State after David's death. And just listening to him, listening to everybody else, I find Mike Baggio to be one of the more credible people involved in this case. This project was going to involve Sean Stone, according to what David Crowley said, but that was in March of 2014. David Crowley posts, Sean Stone, yeah, that one, apparently wants a role in Gray State. So Mike Baggio talks about the movie was going to have A-list actors. He would not name who those A-list actors were. So everything looked good. It looks like the only thing that stopped the $30 million deal was David Crowley's death. If you talk to other people, they're going to tell you something different. Obviously, both of those cannot be true. I'm going to tend to believe the guy who was involved in the deal, Mike Baggio III. And of course, right after Dan Hinnan's interview was posted, Danny Mason jumps into the Facebook group and starts saying a lot of incoherent things from my view, and just a lot of weird things that don't make any sense. And wanting to have a discussion or an interview. Kind of sounded like Danny Mason wanted to kind of, after hearing what Mike Baggio III said, Danny Mason wanted to give a rebuttal to that. So we're definitely open to that whenever Danny Mason's ready. Let's see. So they met face-to-face in September, which is a key time. We don't hear a lot about that September meeting in Hollywood. But then why 1 month later does David Crowley allegedly tell his dad that he walked away from it? He walked away from this deal. It doesn't seem right to me. It definitely is two contradicting things happening here. So, and that's the whole thing about just collecting data. You just go where the data leads you. You don't try to come to your own conclusions, and you definitely don't do it so quickly. It's okay to say that you believe David Crowley is guilty or he's not guilty, but it's another thing to try to pass it off as fact, because nobody can prove either way. Mike Baggio makes it clear we didn't fire David or we didn't get rid of David, however that went, and he didn't walk away from us. I mean, there was never any of that, and I don't know where those two ideas came from. Nothing to my knowledge. Again, we never told David to get lost. I tried contacting David after our September meeting or discussion. I tried contacting David for months to discuss things. I didn't hear from him or anything. So I was getting a little nervous myself. Not nervous for our business transactions. David and I became friends. Not only were we business acquaintances, but we became friends. I called him on the holidays and I wished him a happy Thanksgiving to him and his family. I did that numerous times until I heard the very, very disturbing news. So Mike was still trying to get a hold of David. Still trying to get in contact with him. The project is still going. Everything is moving forward. It's a big deal. So Christmas comes. He calls David on Christmas, around Christmas time, to wish him and Camille happy holidays. Then he went out of town. He had asked somebody, a mutual friend, twice to go to see if he had any communication with David Crowley. Whoever this mutual friend is says that he's going to go and he's going to stop by David Crowley's. He's probably just writing, blah, blah, blah. So it must be somebody in that area, somebody that lived within driving distance to David Crowley. Maybe, maybe not. So the holidays come, the holidays pass, and he tells him, he did not really believe, when he heard this at least, maybe later on he changed his mind, but when he received the news of David's death, Mike was in total shock. I didn't believe it. I didn't believe it. And I think a lot of people didn't believe it at first, and then later on they did. So we'll have to see what his view was and if that ever changed. There's a few follow-up questions I would love to ask Mike Baggio III. Then we get into who the owner is, who owns the Gray State and all that. And Mike Baggio III makes it clear that his communications were never with Danny Mason. It was only with David Crowley. MEG was only working with David Crowley, not with Danny Mason. Yet here we have Danny Mason trying to move forward with this project and trying to involve David's dad in it too, because later on, after David's death, Mike Baggio III says that he's contacted and he's asked about, moving forward with this project. These people have made some video. It's probably the video, the photo shoot that we've seen out there with Danny Mason and Joe Biggs, where they're basically, I don't know, running around shooting at invisible things or whatever, but shooting at things off screen. So doesn't sound like Mike Baggio wanted anything to do with it after that, and it sounded like he passed on whatever Danny Mason was trying to sell him. And somehow this all involved David Crowley's dad as well. So that's a big deal. So Baggio makes it clear everything with David, all of his conversations were all good, never saw any downside, everything looked fine. Again, something that totally is different from what we're hearing from other people and other sources. And they always, from the beginning, people have made it sound like the movie deal crashed and sent David into this dark place, and then that's what caused the whole downfall. And what we're learning is that there's another side to that people don't want to talk about. So we thank Mike Baggio III for talking about it and for sharing his view. It means a lot to us because, again, we're not trying to sell anybody on a particular view or a particular story. We're just trying to figure out what really happened here. And in the 30 minutes that he spoke with Dan, I think he's given us a lot of good things to think about. So I would really encourage everybody to go and listen to that. Go watch that on Dan Hennon's YouTube page, please, because it's definitely worth looking at, regardless of what your view is. If you really care about getting to the truth, if you really care about finding out what happened, this is another valuable piece of information to go look at. Thank you.